Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're finally going to be talking about the Thousand Suns and how to deal with them as the Aeldari. So, as many of you guys know, I've been wanting to do a video for a while covering the Thousand Suns. I haven't had a lot of experience against them, not only in 10th edition, but also in 9th edition. I really just haven't gone up against the army in quite a few years, and I wanted to try my hand at it. I finally got a game against somebody who was willing to kind of showcase the army and, be patient enough to go through all the abilities and stuff like that that he could do each and every turn. So we did finally play that game, and it's taken me a little bit of time to make the video, but here we are. And I have to say, Thousand Suns, they're very scary, but the Eldari have tools that other armies simply don't for dealing with them. And I think the insanely high win rate of the Thousand Suns is partially due to the fact that they can ignore so many of those tough faction things that are typically seen in competitive play. You know, the heavy armor and invul saves, the Thousand Suns just take away like nothing. And I think that does contribute highly to their win rate. But also, they're a high skill cap faction, just like the Eldar. But unlike the Eldar, who are more of a trading faction, the Thousand Suns want to basically control the board and prevent you from doing anything. So there's a little bit of a difference there, and there's some nuances as well. Think of Thousand Suns as basically a highly elite specialized army that wants to essentially control you and get rid of all the tools you have to score objectives and things like that over the course of the game. They want to essentially bleed you out over the course of the game. And I learned this over my time kind of studying the Thousand Suns, and when I finally went into battle against them, I was more than prepared. So let me show you my results, and let's talk a little bit about Thousand Suns, what you should look out for, etc. So in today's video, we're first going to be covering what the Thousand Suns do. Their army rule, detachment bonus, enhancements, and stratagems. We're going to be talking about the key Thousand Suns units and their Eldari counters. We're going to be talking about tips and general game plans when facing the Thousand Suns, the strengths and weaknesses of the army itself, of course, and my recent experience playing against them and what I learned in that game. We're going to be reviewing the army lists, deployment, and battle review, of course. So, the first thing you have to know about Thousand Suns is their Cabal point system. This system is probably the strongest army ability in the game right off the bat. So right out of the gate, the Thousand Suns probably have the strongest army ability in the game, bar none. However, over the course of that game, if you're able to destroy the characters that generate these points, it becomes one of the weakest and most useless. Sound familiar? So, let's talk about these different rituals that they can perform. All of them are good, and a lot of them on here are probably pretty iconic, and you guys know about them, but we're going to speak of them anyway. So, Weaver of Fates allows a T-Suns model within 18 inches of a Psyker to reroll a saving throw. Now, this is important because all of these rituals require Thousand Suns to be within 18 inches of each other or within 18 inches of the target. Why is this important? Well, it means that Thousand Suns really do, as a very elite army, have to move close together to be able to function properly, or use a Mutalith Vortex Beast, which you will see in many Thousand Suns lists, to extend that range to 36. Now, this can be a little difficult, and this is why this faction's a high skill cap, because if you don't know your inches and you don't know your measurements with Thousand Suns, you're not going to perform well. And that's why a lot of players, think that maybe Thousand Suns aren't so good, maybe they're not as experienced and stuff like that with the faction, and they're like, well, how can the Thousand Suns be that OP? Right? I'm barely able to get, some rituals off on the targets I want to all the time. And it's because you really have to know your stuff. So let's talk about, Weaver of Fates, reroll a saving throw. Temporal Surge allows a unit to move again. And this is a normal move. This actually stacks with Magnus's +2 movement ability, which I learned within our game that we played. Didn't really have a super effect, but it was, it was really good for only 5 Cabal points. Echoes of the Warp is you can target a Psyker's unit with a stratagem for 0 CP, even if you've already used it this phase. Now, there is a correction on this. It now is not 0 CP, it is just 1 less. So yeah, most stratagems will be free, but Thousand Suns have a few 2 CP stratagems that is only going to be reduced by 1 CP because of the recent erratas and FAQs in Pry Nexus. Doombolt is perhaps one of the most broken abilities in the game because it does a ton of mortal wounds, and it doesn't actually count as an attack for the purposes of, kind of, making a wound roll, making a hit roll. It doesn't have to do any of that. And even though opponents do get to feel no pain against psychic attacks, it counts as a quote-unquote psychic attack for the purposes of feel no pain and stuff like that. But what it doesn't count as is an actual attack as far as, things like the Wraithguard ability or things like the Bloodthirsters, or not Bloodthirsters, Khorne Berserker's Surge ability, right? It doesn't count as an attack for those reasons. So a lot of those strong armies that have those abilities, they just don't work against Doombolt. So you roll a dice. On a 1, unit suffers D3 mortals, which is the worst that can happen. On a 2 to 5, it suffers D3 plus 3. Oftentimes that means our aspect units are just going to get wiped out in a single Doombolt. And on a 6, it suffers D3 plus 6. Luckily, this never happened in my game, the infamous roll of the 6, but it definitely could, and that means an automatic dead aspect warrior unit, and possibly even more. Very good ability. You can duplicate this through numerous means in the Thousand Suns army, and if you have enough Cabal points, you can, fire off 2 of these a turn. Twist of Fate is 9 Cabal points, and it reduces, or at least I should say, it improves the armor penetration characteristic of attacks against that target unit by 2. So, Thousand Suns already have a -1 on most of their weapons. Most of their weapons are Torrent, and they're going to ignore cover, and they're going to get a -2 on top of this. This is very good for, burning down high armor targets that they can wound easily. This will come into play in our game, and I will talk about why it wasn't as effective as it could be. Kindred Sorcery is their detachment bonus. This is also very strong. All psychic weapons for an entire round get either lethal hits, sustained hits, or devastating wounds. Now, some of the psychic weaponry that the Thousand Suns come with already have some of these abilities, or they have Torrent, so, lethal hits and sustained hits isn't going to work. But regardless, they're going to get something that's going to help them out. Now, it doesn't affect all weapons, it just affects psychic weapons. However, there are a couple of ways in which you can make the Thousand Suns weapons psychic, and then, of course, benefit from this ability. So, again, we will talk about that later in the video. It did come up in our game, and luckily, he had trouble wounding the target in the first place. So, devastating wounds and stuff like that didn't really come into play as he would have liked. Okay, so this is one of the relics that, enhancements that they can take. So, Thousand Sun Psyker, Bearer can be selected to use a ritual even if another Psyker from your army has already been selected to use that ritual this phase. So this is an auto take for Thousand Suns players. Normally you can't use a ritual more than once. This allows you to do so. So you put this on one of your Psykers, probably a, sorcerer, one of your basic sorcerers in your list, and then you could, duplicate Doombolt or duplicate Temporal Surge and stuff like that, and you can move very fast. Now, luckily, it's been FAQ'd. You can't Temporal Surge multiple times, right? You can't use Temporal Surge and then use it again on the same unit. You have to use it on a different unit, but still, you can move very fast with this army, even though its base speed is very slow. Now, we have the Umbralific Crystal. This one's also very good. This one essentially allows you to Skyleap in your command phase, which is pretty much also an auto-include for an army that is very small and wants mobility. As for the stratagems, this one's the one I'm talking about that gives your unit the psychic ability. So it basically gives all of your Inferno bolt guns, Inferno, bolt pistols, combat bolters, Inferno combat weapons the psychic ability, and a strength characteristic of 5. This is really good with the detachment bonus. Now, here's the thing about this, though. It doesn't work with flamers, warp flamers. This did, and I mentioned this came up in our game, and because I was able to kind of study the Thousand Suns before the matchup, I was able to tell my opponent, it doesn't actually work on your flamers. And, he realized, he's like, oh yeah, I forgot, right? Because it's easy to forget that kind of stuff, no big deal. But yeah, it doesn't work on the flamers. Usually Thousand Suns players are taking the flamers. So if they are taking those, they cannot use this stratagem on the unit. I mean, they can for the sorcerer, or if there's a model in the unit that has like a bolt pistol or something, but it's usually not worth it. Psychic Dominion is their defense stratagem. So they get a feel no pain 4+ against psychic attacks, and psychic weapons have the hazardous ability. Now, this usually isn't a big deal, but if you're running things like, Farseers, or you're running things like Warlocks and stuff like that, you have the psychic ability, this will unfortunately affect those, and they will have to take a hazardous check. Usually it's not a big deal, but they will get a 4+ feel no pain against things like Eldritch Storm, for example, and your opponent might just pop it just because, and maybe even using a ritual to do so if they feel like they need that unit to survive. Devastating Sorcery. You select 1,000 Sun Psyker that has not been selected to shoot, and they can reroll all their hit rolls and wound rolls. Really powerful, especially on some of the more potent Psykers that we will see in the Thousand Suns roster. Also, this is probably one of the stratagems that really pisses people off the most. You target a Psyker model. Now, it has to be a Psyker model, right? And that's something that some Thousand Suns players could possibly get wrong. Rhinos, Mutalith Vortex Beasts, basically, if it's not a Psyker, it does not have the ability to be targeted with this stratagem. But if you do have a Psyker, like Magnus, for example, you change the damage of an attack to 0 in any phase. So this is insane because this can be used whenever you want. This could be used in the assault phase. This could be used in the shooting phase. This could be used in your own turn from Overwatch, right? So Eldar love to Overwatch with like a Bright Lance or something like that. Thousand Suns can just say, nope, and block it out with a CP if you're targeting Magnus or a Psyker. So pretty powerful strat. Sorcerous Might basically gives 9 inches to the range of the psychic weapons equipped by your unit. Again, this also stacks with that other stratagem I talked about that gives psychic, the psychic profile to the weapons in the unit. Doesn't work on the flamers, but it works on pretty much everything else. So, yeah, it's pretty powerful. You might not see it that often, but it is pretty good still. Lastly, Warp Sight. This is the stratagem that people are kind of in the Eldar community, I guess, most afraid of, but I wouldn't be, and here's why. The Thousand Suns really only generate 2 CP per round. They don't have any ability to generate extra CP that I know of outside of cultists. So, and usually I haven't seen a lot of Thousand Suns players bringing those. And basically this is how it works. You select 1,000 Suns Psyker unit. Now, it has to be a Psyker unit. So either a Psyker or a unit with a Psyker in it, like Rubric Marines. And you choose one enemy unit that is visible to that unit. And then all Thousand Suns Psyker models making an attack with a psychic weapon that targets that unit can have indirect fire and ignores cover. That's really good, but people were saying, when I initially started doing my research, that Magnus could use this every turn and just kind of sit back and just indirect fire all game long. There actually has to be another unit that sees that unit, so if you hide correctly and you make sure that your angles are covered and they can't really see most of your more valuable units, then Magnus is not going to be able to indirect fire just anything. He has to indirect fire the unit that is chosen by that other Thousand Suns unit. So, very powerful ability, but it does require a little bit of finagling, and it does require on the Thousand Suns part some, basically effective movement to get line of sight. Okay, modifying a stratagem CP cost. So I wanted to just give you guys some proof of the ritual I spoke of earlier, right? Rules that enable you to target a unit from your army with a stratagem for 0 CP, but do not specify the name of the stratagem, instead reduce the CP cost by 1. So you can't use that warp site 2 CP stratagem for free. It will still cost CP. And then, of course, stratagems that can be used more than once per phase or turn. Parts of a rule that allow a player to use a stratagem, even if they have already targeted another unit with that stratagem in the same phase, can only be used. The name of the stratagem is specified in that rule. So you can't basically use the 0 damage stratagem on Magnus twice, right? You can only use it once. There's nothing that allows you in the Thousand Suns Codex to get around that. Okay, let's talk about the units. Rubric Marines, your basic, insanely detailed models. I actually think these guys are one of the coolest models as far as Chaos Space Marines. But here it is. What are players going to be taking? They're going to be taking Warp Flamers, which ignore cover and have Torrent. And they're basically just 12-inch Flamers with AP -1. Extremely powerful. They have Cabal Sorcerers 1, so they generate 1 ritual point, so they can use their rituals easier. They have the ability to reroll wound rolls of 1. If the target is on an objective, you can reroll the wound roll instead. They also have the Icon of Flame. Each time a model in the Bearers unit makes a range attack, if a critical wound is scored, improve the armor penetration characteristic by 1. They also come with a 5+ invulnerable save. So this unit is very anti-armor, especially with all the stratagems, and that's kind of what I'm saying, is that this army is really good against armor. If you're bringing something like Deathwing Knights, it doesn't even matter if you have the 4+ Feel No Pain against Doombolt and stuff like that, because they can just bring in a unit of rubrics and flame you down, right? And use stratagems and stuff like that to just force so many saves on you that you're going to die. It's very powerful. You're rerolling all your wound rolls if you're on an objective as well. So that's pretty insane, right? And this is why Rubric Marines get the kind of reputation that they have. Now, Flamers are also very good for Overwatch, which is good against Eldar, but it's range 12. So a lot of our units can kind of skirt around this. Like Wind Riders, for example, are very good against this unit, and I'll talk about why later. But yeah, this unit's very powerful, but they do have their weaknesses. They're not that durable. They're regular Marines with a 5+ invulnerable save, and the invulnerable save is nice, but it really doesn't save them against a lot of the anti-mech weaponry that we can take. The next thing you're going to have to look out for, of course, are the Exalted Sorcerers. Now, there's 2 types, on Disc of Tzeentch and without the Disc of Tzeentch. Now, the Exalted Sorcerer on the disc is basically a kind of a, I would say, a control type unit. It gives models in the unit a 4+ invul. Who cares? It's not that big of a deal. Especially when you're, hitting them with shuriken cannons, it's not really going to matter. He has the ability, though, to essentially make a unit that is not a monster or vehicle -2 to movement and charge rolls for the rest of that turn. This is really more effective against armies like Blood Angels that are going to be charging all the time. Here's the thing, right? It's like one of those classic rule is good, but in theory, but in reality, the unit's just going to die. If they're going against Eldar and they're, targeting a melee unit like Scorpions or something like that with an Exalted Sorcerer with the rubrics, the Scorpions are dead. The ability itself is not going to be able to go off, right? So you don't have to worry too much about that with the Eldar. It does exclude monsters and vehicles. So you're not going to have to worry about your Avatar of Cain moving slower. But you will have to worry about Doombolt. Now, as for his weapons and stuff like that, he has Arcane Fire, which is a torrent weapon. So this goes perfectly with Warp Flamers. Really powerful. Essentially, this is a better Eldritch Storm if you look at it. It has the exact same stats as Eldritch Storm. Slightly less range, but it ignores cover. It's torrent. It doesn't have blast, but who cares, right? And it's auto hitting. That's the point. Really powerful. As far as his combat goes, it's not great, but it's not terrible. It's better than a Farseer. So essentially, these guys are just better Farseers offensively, and defensively, they're also very good. But they're expensive. That's the thing. They are more expensive than your traditional Farseer. So that's the Exalted Sorcerer on disc. You'll probably see a couple of these in your opponent's army. The Mutalith, I think I said that right. Mutalith Vortex Beast is an auto include because of its ability, which allows it to essentially count the ritual range as double. So instead of 18, it's 36 when it's within 6 inches of a friendly Thousand Sun Psyker unit, which again, the whole army should be kind of moving together. And that's one of the weaknesses you can exploit. We'll talk about that later. But this model is going to basically make the whole army function. It also has the mutating vortex aura, so it's kind of hard to just bog down with infantry. You can't really just tie it up in combat. That's the other thing, right? Like a lot of people would say, well, you could just tie this thing up with striking scorpions or rangers or something like that. But the truth is, this thing is going to demolish those units in combat. And even scorpions who have a 3+ save who might survive against its, melee weapons, they're not going to survive the aura, which basically deals mortal wounds to the unit on top of that, right? And makes them take a battle shock test. So this thing has some pretty good range attacks as well. You got to stay away from it. You got to, kind of skirt line of sight and stuff like that. It has a vortex beam that is very powerful against our tanks. Strength 18, AP -4, hits on a 3+. You have D6 +3 attacks with a blast characteristic, which is good at taking out Marines. Again, not so great against Eldar and stuff because it's not really, doesn't matter. But what is good against the Eldar is the Torrent weapon. It is only range 12, but it's 2d6 attack, strength 6, AP -1, damage 1. Do watch out for that. Now, the cool thing about this is that it's not a psyker, so it's never going to be able to get indirect fire. And I know that's going to, confound some of you out there who maybe played against a Thousand Suns player who used indirect fire with this thing. This thing does not have indirect fire. It cannot get indirect fire because it is not a psyker model, right? Look at the keywords. Monster, Demon, Chaos, Zinj, Mutalith, Vortex Beast. It's not a psyker, all right? So it won't be getting that. But it is very tough. 5+ invulnerable save, 5+ still no pain. It's going to be a tough cookie to crack. Oftentimes, it's probably best to just, unless your opponent reveals it super early, it's probably best to just leave it be and just kill everything else. And I'll talk about that later in the video as well. All right, now we have Ahriman. He's an auto include. You'll see Ahriman in every Thousand Suns list. Why? Because once per battle, you can use a ritual for 0 Cabal points. He's also a Cabal of Sorcerers 3, so he's generating 3 points himself, and he adds 1 to the wound roll of the unit he joins, making them, hit much harder. As far as his abilities go, he has an Eldrad type ability where he has a precision attack, strength 6, AP -1, damage D6. But it doesn't have anti-character like Eldrad's ability, so, give and take. You have the Black Staff of Ahriman, which is the melee weapon he has, which is just straight up better than Eldrad's. Weapon skill 2+, strength 7, AP -1, damage 3. But again, the thing about the Thousand Suns is you're rarely going to see these guys in combat with anything that is substantial and they're going to win, right? Oftentimes they do just straight up lose in combat against a lot of combat dedicated units. Alright, then we have the Exalted Sorcerer on foot. Now, his ability is more of a defensive ability. He does give his unit a 4+ invul save, but he revives models. On the roll of a 1, you suffer D3 wounds. That's it, right? You suffer D3 mortals. You don't revive anything. On a 2 to 5, you can return 1 destroyed bodyguard model. On a 6, you can return 2 destroyed bodyguard models. So that's pretty good. It's kind of like a Spirit Seer for Rubric Marines, but it's not like super great, to be real with you guys. It's just a nice ability to have, but you'll often see this guy being attached to big units of Rubrics who are a little more tanky, and may have a little bit more investment in them. As far as his, abilities, he actually just has Eldritch Storm with Devastating Wounds. So instead of, the Torrent, the Ignores cover that the other guy has on the disc, this guy just has Devastating Wounds. So again, it's just like, let's just give a better Eldritch Storm to these guys and call it a day. I'm not complaining. These guys are more expensive. You would expect that they have better abilities. But I don't know why it's Devastating Wounds when the detachment bonus can also just give Devastating Wounds. Kind of doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I guess so you can stack sustained hits with Devastating Wounds and just have an ultra fucking insane Astral Blast. An Astral Blast out of the ass. I don't know. But yeah, so these guys are pretty strong. Again, their melee is nothing to write home about, but it is better than what you'd expect from, Eldar Psychers and stuff like that. So don't expect to beat these guys that easily in combat with your, non-combat type units. Ooh, okay. Now we got to talk about Magnus the Red. This guy is perhaps one of the most brutal Primarchs, Chaos Primarchs at least, in the game. Cabal of Sorcerers 4, he is an auto-include for every Thousand Sons list right now. It's basically a joke, and, I've heard this joke from many people. It's not Thousand Sons, it's Magnus and Sons, because it's Magnus is in every list. He's very powerful. His range attacks are good, but they're only 24 inches, which kind of limits him into what he can actually shoot at sometimes. And again, these are things that did come up in our game that actually did matter. But yeah, he is very strong. He can also benefit from that indirect fire ability we talked about. His melee weapons are also very good. 7 attacks, strength 16, AP minus 3, damage 3. Or 14 attacks, strength 8, AP minus 1, damage 1. Now, he's no Avatar of Cain in combat, don't get me wrong, but he is strong. And he will take out quite a few models. As far as his Crimson King ability, he can either subtract 1 from the damage characteristic of attacks made against him, actually accept psychic attacks, by the way. So if you got a psychic weapon against him, he doesn't get it for some reason, which is kind of funny. Treason of Tzeentch basically gives weapons hazardous if they choose to target him in the shooting phase. But they have to be visible, and it's only 1 unit. So that is kind of a limiting factor. Treason of Tzeentch isn't really something you see a whole lot. Time Flux, however, is. While a friendly Thousand Sons unit is within 6 of the Psyker, add 2 to the move characteristic of models within that unit. And that's just an aura that he gets at all times, so you can stack this with the movement ability from the Cabalic Rituals. And this can move a unit, including himself, by the way, a pretty sizable distance. This guy can actually move 32 inches in a single turn and shoot, but the caveat to that is he can't charge if he uses Temporal Surge. Right? You can't actually charge if you do that. So yeah, Magnus the Red, incredibly powerful model. My strategy for dealing with him was just basically check him with a unit that I knew, and he knew, my opponent knew, would kill Magnus if he did not kill that unit first, and then kill everything else so that Magnus's options are limited when it came to the rituals he could perform on himself. Lastly, we have to talk about the Thousand Sons Demon Prince. So this will be a model that you will probably also see in Thousand Sons lists. It has Skyleap in the form of Ether Stride. In addition to this, it also, if it moves over an enemy unit, you roll 96, and for each 6, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound. It's not that great, but it's there. Has a decent range attack, essentially like a heavy bolter, but with 6 attacks. And it has a pretty decent melee profile. Has a sweep with 14 attacks with AP 0, just, bunch of attacks for clearing out chaff. And it has a pretty good strike against Terminator equivalents and other higher armor targets. So yeah, pretty good for the cost. Now, it does cost like 180 for this guy, But the Thousand Suns do need something kind of tough to be able to score secondary objectives and be able to sweep units off of objectives and chaff and stuff like that. So you will see this guy appear in lists as well. As far as his toughness as well, he is a psyker, so he does benefit from that 0 damage ability. And he does have a 4+ invul save and, 10 wounds, toughness 9. Okay, so let's talk about some effective counters to these units. Now, Wind Riders absolutely wreck Rubric Marines and their attached characters. If you have a big unit of 10, 10 jet bikes or 9 jet bikes with the Farseer and the Warlock Skyrunner, you are going to be doing a ton of damage into them, and they also have a powerful Overwatch threat against them. Thousand Suns love to get angles on you, so if you can just Overwatch one of their units of Rubrics when they come into view, that's going to pay for itself, because now your opponent might have actually used something like Temporal Surge on them or something like that. Now, of course, they're just going to die from it, right? Great to have Wind Riders in your list against Rubric Marines. They're very effective. The Death Jester is also a great pick, as it's good into Rubrics and can occasionally pick off characters if you're lucky. So with Fate's Messenger, if you get 3 hits, you may actually be able to with a Fate dice and a wound reroll. Of course, Fate's Messenger as well. You will sometimes be able to hit 3 devastating wounds on a character, which will kill them. Death Jester is a good pick into this faction. Warwalkers are also really good because they can get the jump on a Thousand Suns army with its scout move if you get the first turn. And this is before Cabal points are generated. Keep in mind that Cabal points generate during your opponent's command phase and not during yours. So if you get first turn, you can actually use Warwalkers to scout up and take out something quickly before their Cabal points activate. Striking Scorpions, if positioned correctly, can also threaten Rubrics and solo characters alike as well from turn 1. Or, if you don't get turn 1, you can force Rubrics and characters out into the open where units like Wind Riders and other things can pick them off. And again, Rubric Marines aren't that tough. A lot of people look at the 5+ invul save and say, oh my god, these guys are really tough. Rubric Marines were way, way tougher in 9th edition. They're not as tough as they once were. Swooping Hawks also have the range and mobility to avoid nasty Torrent Overwatch while dealing chip damage or scoring secondaries. And I will say this, another unit that is also pretty good at taking out Rubric Marines, but is a trading unit in this kind of game, is the Solitaire. Will the Solitaire survive after taking out a unit of Rubrics and their character? No, probably not. But if you position it correctly, they won't be able to Overwatch because they won't have line of sight. And you can then, of course, dive in there, destroy the unit, maybe consolidate into something if you're lucky and your opponent, kind of misplayed a little bit. And, probably die afterward. But that's okay. It did its job. If the Solitaire is able to trade up against a unit of Rubrics and its character, it did an amazing job. Okay, so what are the tips and general game plan when facing Thousand Suns? So, number 1, apply early pressure, and if you go first, be aggressive. Cabal points don't generate until their command phase. So if you have units like Scorpions that can fight on the first turn, kill a unit of Rubrics or something like that, you definitely want to do that. You also want to deploy your Infiltrators last. Thousand Suns are a really small army, right? So if you're able to deploy your Infiltrators and Scout units after your opponent is fully deployed, you will know where your opponent is set up, and therefore you will have the advantage if you do get first turn. Also, number 3, play wide. I know a lot of people don't like to think about this, but Thousand Suns are going to play very compact. They're going to play as one force. So if you play wide with your scoring units and force your opponent to split their forces to deal with them, you're going to do much better than if you concentrated your forces and the Thousand Suns player can just absolutely wipe you out, right? If the Thousand Suns units, like the Rubric Marines, can wipe out 3 or 4 Aspect Warriors a turn, or, I'll say 2 or 3 units just to keep it kind of conservative, although it is possible to wipe out 3 or 4 of them with the right Cabal rituals and stuff like that, then that's going to be bad news bears for you, right? So definitely play wider, spread out. I know it doesn't seem like a good strategy against a lot of armies, but against a very elite army like Thousand Suns, it is going to be the best way to go. Don't overextend yourself in order to kill Magnus as well. It's better to check him and force your opponent to play more reserved with the Primarch than actually go all out against him, fail, and then lose the game. Because that's essentially what's going to happen. If you fail to kill him in a single turn, you will lose. Even a novice Thousand Suns player will be able to retaliate against you so hard that you're not going to have any tools left to deal with the rest of their army. Lastly, don't be shy about putting a damage dealing unit or two in reserve. Thousand Suns can't be everywhere at once, and by turn 3, they will have trouble screening effectively. And even by turn 2, if you can throw off your opponent as to where your damage dealers are going, your Shadow Specters, your Wind Riders, your units that are going to be primary damage dealers for you against this army, then your opponent's going to be kind of unsure of where to defend himself at. Thousand Suns do not have a lot of extra units to screen, so if you have a lot of mobility and you can kind of either deep strike in or come in reserve and then move very quickly onto the board somewhere, that is a big advantage to hold over your opponent. Okay, so let's talk about my recent experience playing against Thousand Suns. And we'll start out with the lists used in the game. Okay, so let's look at the Thousand Suns roster, and I'll just kind of go through this quickly with you guys. He had many, many characters. And I'm not joking, it was a ton of characters. So in the Epic Hero category, Ahriman on disc and Magnus the Red. He had an Exalted Sorcerer, just regular, on foot. They joined a big unit of 10 Rubric Marines. 2 Exalted Sorcerers on discs in smaller rubrics. And then he had a Thousand Suns Demon Prince with wings. So if you look at how many characters this is actually 6 characters in his list. Quite a lot. As for the battle line, he had a squad of 10 Rubric Marines. He had 4 squads of 5 Rubric Marines, all had flamers. He also had a Mutalith Vortex Beast. And again, this is before the nerf, so the points are a little different. And a Thousand Suns Rhino. Now, this looks like a list that is extremely small. And it is. It looked very small in the battlefield, guys. I think there are ways, of course, of making a bigger Thousand Suns list, but the current meta of Thousand Suns is take as many characters as you can. So it ended up being really small. As for the Eldar list, what I brought to the table was a much bigger list, a much wider list. I had a Solitaire. I had an Autarch Wayleaper with a gem, although I never ended up needing the gem, but still. Farseer on foot. I had a Farseer Skyrunner as well. I had a Spirit Seer and a Warlock Skyrunner. Warlock Skyrunner, Farseer Skyrunner are going with Wind Riders, Spirit Seer is going with Wraithguard. I had Guardian Defenders bringing up the rear. They were basically there for, kind of screening and also generating Fate dice, which they did well. I liked how the Guardian Defenders performed in this game in general. I had 2 units of Striking Scorpions with Biting Blades. 2 units of Swooping Hawks, of course, with the standard kind of loadout that the Exarch has with the Hawk's Talon and Power Sword. I had a big unit of 10 Wraithguard. I was very up in the air about whether or not I should take this unit to the battle, but I ended up just saying F it and brought them anyway. And, they did all right. I think I would have rather, in hindsight, gone with something like Falcons or Fire Prisms or something like that, but, these guys did fine. I had 3 Shroud Runners, I had a big unit of 9 Wind Riders, and I had 3 Warwalkers with Bright Lances in this list. So, quite a wide list, quite a lot of different targets for my opponent to deal with, and, kind of actually be able to have to, I guess, control, because there's so much in this list that could deal devastating damage and then maybe hide behind something and, not suffer the consequences. Okay. So let's go ahead and talk about the board and the game itself. Now, the deployment we were using was terrain layout number 1. My opponent wanted to use this. It was already set up at his house, so we decided, let's just go with it. Terrain layout number 1, perfect. We used Dawn of War deployment just to make it easy. Again, this was more of, I would say this was more of a semi-competitive kind of vibe. It wasn't a super, competitive, try-hard vibe at all. This guy was a cool guy. He wasn't, super, cheesy or anything like that with a lot of the stuff. I think, in general, I think he was a good opponent. And, we had a reasonably fun game. There was only one little hiccup about the game that I'll talk about later, but yeah, it was a good game. We used Dawn of War deployment to make it easy, so this is how the board looked. This is where we ended up deploying our forces. Now, I'll describe all these things to you, basically, and you can see kind of my mouse here. I will hover over the unit that I'm talking about. So for his deployment, unit of 5 Rubric Marines with, I can't remember the character with them. It might have been Ahriman. I'm just blanking on it. They kind of all looked the same to me at the time. This unit actually didn't have a character in it, so disregard one of these models here. This unit, big unit of 10 with the Exalted Sorcerer on foot. Big Magnus back here. Demon Prince with wings right here in front. Mutalith Vortex Beast right next to them. And then we have a Chaos Rhino, or, Thousand Suns Rhino with 2 units of 5 rubrics inside. Now, while he was deploying all this, I was basically just deploying, my Guardians, my Wraith Guard. I deployed a unit of Swooping Hawks here. I deployed a unit of Swooping Hawks there. I deployed my Autarch Wayleaper. Deployed my Shroud Runners over here. Like, I'm basically doing all the stuff that he's not going to expect. So, my last deployments were my Warwalkers. I deployed one Warwalker over here as well. I deployed the Solitaire here. Because by then, I already knew he had a ton of assets deployed here. So I was like, all right, I put the Solitaire right here. I figured, this guy could, kind of phantasm if I really needed him to, if my opponent just went and hauled ass to kill him. And, of course, I have my Warwalkers over here. Now, my plan was starting this game, and Striking Scorpions, 2 units, and my Wind Riders are in reserve. So starting this game, I basically had this plan that I was going to go for an Alpha Strike if I got turn 1. And I was going for it because I knew that if I could get it off, I would have a huge advantage for the rest of the game. And it would make things much easier to deal with. So, I didn't think I could, I didn't think I needed 3 Warwalkers to kill either the Rhino or the Demon Prince, so I just used 2. I used 2 units of Striking Scorpions here. Now, he did position his models in a way to where he could overwatch if I moved over here, right? He could overwatch with the Mutalith, he could overwatch with this unit. But what I actually did, and I do end up getting first turn, just to let you guys know, I ended up moving around here, and my opponent was unable, because of the angles and the line of sight and stuff like that, was unable to overwatch me effectively. So I was able to get away with this. Okay, so anyway, this is the deployment here. And then this is what happened during the first turn and second turn of the game. So on my side of the board, I moved up 2 Warwalkers up here, and I actually took shots at the Demon Prince, first and foremost, and killed him. Now, how did this happen, right? Proxy Hammer. How could this possibly happen? He has a 0 damage, kind of negation ability that he could use. Well, my first Warwalker went up and shot it twice, and actually, he failed both invul saves. So that was a little unlucky. He rolled double 3s on it. He didn't have any Cabal points to reroll a save. So this is what allowed me to kill the Demon Prince. So, of course, he failed both. He blanked one of the damages, and I put in 8 damage from a Fate dice, which I did have. When I rolled in the beginning, I got 2 6s. I got a 5, which is an extremely good roll in the beginning. I won't lie. And then I got like a couple 2s and a 1. So it was kind of like the both extremes, which works for me. So, took 2 shots, did 8 damage. He has 2 wounds left. My other Warwalker took 2 more shots at him, and I dealt enough damage. He did fail one of his invul saves again. He did pass one, but he did also fail one, and I was able to kill it. Now, in hindsight, I wouldn't have done this because this is very risky, and I probably should have gone after the Rhino in hindsight. But, hindsight's 20/20. I got a little greedy. It paid off this time, but it might not have paid off, every time. So just for you guys out there, Demon Princes, a couple Warwalkers could probably finish it off. They have a good chance of killing it, but it's not a guaranteed chance, so be aware of that. As far as the Rhino, that's an easy kill. 2 Warwalkers, even 1 Warwalker could easily kill this thing. It has no invul save. It's just there to die. So you could use 1 Warwalker, kill this, and then, force the rubrics out of the transport and make them slower. So ended up doing that. The Scorpions went behind here. They hid behind this wall right here. If you see here, you could move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Actually, you just need 6 to get here. And this unit moved around to here as well, so that this unit could not overwatch. They could not see the Scorpions, therefore they could not overwatch them. And those units both charged in. We had a 1, 2, 3, 4-inch charge here. I think this unit had a 5-inch charge, but we end up making both charges just fine. And we ended up taking out 6 of their number. So not as good as I thought, actually. I thought I was going to go in there and wreck way more Rubric Marines in this big unit and basically cripple it for the rest of the game. That did not happen. I only killed 6 of them. Well, that's how the cookie crumbles sometimes, right? You get a little lucky over here, get a little unlucky over here. So that was my first turn, essentially. Now, as far as my movement goes, I moved my Solitaire right in this corner here, just in case I needed to, like, move them over here with a Phantasm just to protect them. I didn't think I would have to, but just in case. Moved my Autarch Wayleaper onto the center objective here. I moved my Guardians up. They took this objective here. They weren't generating, unfortunately, Fate dice at this point, but it wasn't worth it to put my Guardians out in the open where they could just die easily. It was better to put them out here and control this objective. Warwalker scouts up, gets behind this ruin. Shroud Runners get behind this ruin as well. Oh, and as for secondary objectives, I went and chose Assassinate, and that was a good pick, as it turns out, because there were just so many characters in this list. It was absolutely insane. And behind enemy lines. So he went for tactical objectives. And I think the first turn, if I'm not mistaken, he got Sabotage and he also got Assassinate. So, yeah, he wasn't able to pick up Assassinate yet, but he kept that and he was eventually able to score on it. But anyway, so Swooping Hawks moved to screen because I didn't want this unit to be, just in case I failed my charge or something catastrophic happened, I didn't want them to come behind here and just wreck this entire unit of Wraithguard with a bunch of abilities. So, screened out. Swooping Hawks here moved up a little bit behind this wall just to kind of stage up, just to, see where my opponent was going to do, see what my opponent was going to do, and then that's it. That was my turn. His turn comes around, and he's a little frustrated that the Demon Prince died, but, life is life. He gets out immediately his 2 Rubric Marine squads from the Rhino. The Rhino, by the way, can't move past this part of the field. Because, and the other thing, right? I did declare a charge with my Warwalker into the Rhino. So the Rhino was engaged in combat. So it couldn't move without falling back. I had a model here, and I had a model engaged. So the only way he could possibly move was here, but he would be blocked off by Magnus. So he chose to move around here as far as he could, dropped off these guys. And between Magnus, the Mutalith, and these, Rubric Marine units, he was able to easily kill the 2 Scorpion squads, which he fell back from. So he did fall back with this unit here. So they didn't do anything that turn. But he was able to kill the Scorpions, kill the Warwalkers. Now, this doesn't seem like a good trade at all, right? 2 Warwalkers and 2 Scorpions for, 6 rubrics, which is about worth 100 points. So, a little bit less than 2 Scorpion squads. And a Demon Prince, which is 180, which again is a little bit less than the Warwalkers. That's true. It wasn't exactly an even trade, but what it did was it blocked him in his deployment zone and stopped him from being able to fully control this triangle of the board. So if you look at the Thousand Suns player, his objective right now, and you can tell by the way he's deployed, is to control this objective, control the center, or just, fire upon the center, whatever moves into the center, and control this objective right here. That's the goal. Control these 3 objectives. Use your mobility, use your things like Doombolt to erase anything that comes on the objective to score, and basically just bleed your opponent out of resources. So, he gets to go. He can't really move around a lot. The Rubric Marines do get out. They do end up having to shoot the Striking Scorpions and mess with them. So they waste their activations killing that stuff. He does also use this unit to charge into a Warwalker because funny thing is this Mutilith Vortex Beast shot at one of them and didn't fully kill it. So he had to shoot at it with these guys, and he underestimated the -1 to wound. So he was wounding on 6s, so he didn't quite do enough damage with the, with this unit, and he ended up charging in, killing it, and finishing it off. So this unit is now kind of over here at this point. But remember, I have Wind Riders in reserve. Now, my opponent knew that the Wind Riders would come in and maybe kill something. But I think what he thought was that he could then retaliate against the Wind Riders. And that just wasn't possible because I was letting him know after that, like, yeah, they can overwatch, they have sustained hits, they have this, they have guide, right? And by the way, something else you guys should know. If a Farseer is attached to a unit of Wind Riders with the Warlock attached as well, they can both use their psychic powers from reserve on the unit that they're joined to. Now, some of you guys might be questioning that, but in GW's ruling, and it wasn't recent, it was back in Pariah Nexus at the very beginning, units that are in reserve can still use abilities as long as they don't specify that you have to be on the battlefield. So a Farseer's guide ability can be used on its own unit. You just can't measure range. So I couldn't, for example, measure range from reserve to a unit on the board because reserved units aren't actually placed. But if there's an ability that targets the unit itself, or you use that ability on its own unit that it's joined to, you can absolutely use it. So guide and also reveal from the Warlock can be used in reserve before you come in. There's no question that that's allowed. Imperial Guard can do it with orders sometimes. When they have units in reserve that can target themselves with orders, they can do that. And it's like that with any other unit that has an ability that can be activated in the command phase that targets its own self. It just has to not specify that the unit has to be on the board. Okay, so now that we have that out of the way, this is what happened turn 1. He moved a unit of rubrics over here, used Magnus's +2 inches ability to give his, model some bonus movement. So he's able to make it here with an advance roll. This unit went behind this wall and staged up, which I thought was smart because now I'm kind of at this position where he's starting to kind of control this objective up here and this objective. So, after he moves his Mutilith here, he's secured this objective. I'm not going to have much to be able to deal with that. And he's secured this objective for now. But I do have tools to deal with this unit up here, just not at this current time. Okay, so this is what happens turn 2. I bring my Wind Riders in here. I annihilate this unit here. By the way, this unit here is now over here. So, annihilated. He kind of figured that was going to be the case. But, it is what it is. Shit happens. The Solitaire moved up here behind this wall, blocking itself from being overwatched by this unit, and later charged this unit right here and annihilated all of them with a blitz move. I had 12 attacks. I hit probably 11 times, I think, and then I re-rolled it and I hit, so I got all 12 hits. I got 9 wounds, and then I re-rolled a wound and got it. So Solitaire, with some pretty decent rolling, was able to force so many saves on this unit, so many 5+ saves, that they just straight up failed. He had to take 5 saves at a time. His first roll didn't get a single 5. All 5 rubrics died. And then that meant 5 saves on the... I don't think it was Ahriman. I think it was a Exalted Sorcerer on a disc. I think it was one of those. So it also died. It got blasted. So yeah, that was pretty insane. Got into 2 assassination points with that. I got an assassination point here earlier in the game. And things were looking very good. Now, the Solitaire traded up considerably here. I saw this opportunity and I immediately went for it because Solitaires, they make a great, well, let me put it this way. They make a great fight-first defensive unit. But in this battle, that wasn't going to happen. So I had to make sure it traded well. So that happened there. The Wind Riders fire and faded back over here behind this wall so that the Mutalith didn't just move over and annihilate them. And also, a couple of other units could have just done that as well. The Swooping Hawks here moved up behind this wall right here, and the Wraith Guard that had moved kind of closer to the wall in turn 1 advanced up into this area right here to hide, essentially. So we count all of this as obscuring terrain, basically. I know there's an eyeball here that says you can see, but you can physically see, but it's obscuring terrain. So that's what we counted it as. And we moved over here. The Shroud Runners and the Warwalker were just chilling here, and they were just going to come out when needed to, kind of be able to, shoot at something if they needed to, kind of check Magnus a little bit, make sure he wasn't like totally safe. The main thing though is we're trying to score behind enemy lines, right? We're trying to score that secondary objective. So we had them back here for that reason. Swooping Hawks, stayed screening. The Autarch stayed right here. I did have this fear that this unit here was going to use that Umbralific Crystal to, deep strike here in this area. But I had my Wind Riders right here. They would have overwatched that unit, and it would have been bad for them. So, yeah. But, in hindsight, I'm thinking about that a little bit, and we talked about it a little bit after the game. My opponent assumed that I could overwatch him, but I actually don't think I could have. And I think this is a little bit of an oversight from my opponent, because it's used in the command phase. It's not used in the movement phase, I believe. So that means that Overwatch wouldn't take effect. But I could be wrong. Let me know in the comment section on that. I could be wrong, but I did have a plan just in case. I was just going to simply move my Autarch via Phantasm on the other side, but I wouldn't have scored this objective. So let me know. But yeah, in any case, he was planning on moving in this area, and he wasn't able to. Oh, other little bit of bad luck. He tried to revive one of the models in this unit, and actually he rolled a 1, and then he rolled another, it was like a 2 for the D3 damage. So one of his models took a wound, which kind of sucks, right? So he only had 4 models and his leader. That's usually enough, though, to actually deal some significant damage. So anyway, I think he missed a little bit of an opportunity there. But he also said that he didn't think he was going to do enough damage to the Autarch to kill him fully. I had the gem, and I probably, honestly, in hindsight, might have just left him here just so that, it could eat up some of the firepower from here so he doesn't go after the Wind Riders. Anyway, so that's my turn, essentially. During his turn, again, he actually did nothing with this unit. He kind of just staged them ready to deep strike somewhere, and they didn't go anywhere this turn. The unit here, actually, let me show you. Okay, here we go. So, the unit that was on this objective went up here. This unit also came up, and they got an angle on my Wraith Guard. So they moved in this little bit of terrain here and started shooting at my Wraith Guard. And they ended up killing 3 of them, which is kind of not that high. And basically the reason why that is because I had Fortune up on them. And a lot of their weapons are just simply not equipped to deal with Wraiths. And I realized that all of their weaponry wounded on 6s with Fortune. Their psychic weapons are strength 6. They were wounding on 6s with Fortune. Really all they had was the AP. So everything that went through, I had like a 5+ save against because the AP, -3, -2, it was really high AP, but it just didn't do that much damage. So I ended up losing 3 of them right off the bat. And he did also want to shoot Magnus at them. And Magnus, I think, killed another one, if I'm not mistaken, but he was hitting on 4s. He didn't have direct line of sight to them, if I'm not mistaken, because he was over here on this objective. So he was firing indirect, so he's hitting on 4+. But remember, the Spirit Seer has an ability to revive a model, so that's why I didn't put 4X's here. I only put 3. Anyway, so I ended up losing 4. Now, the first time he shot me with this unit, and I actually shot back at him, and I killed 4,000 Sun Rubric Marines with the retaliation attacks. At the time, I didn't have as many losses here. I think I only had 2 losses from the initial shots. So I was able to shoot back with 8 models, kill 4 of them, and, sad times for the Thousand Suns player at this point, who's desperately trying to get better trades on me, but is failing. Yeah, fortune really helped me in this scenario. Now, the other thing is that normally the psychic weapons would get things like, lethal hits and stuff like that. But one of these units had Ahriman in it, and his ability is a precision attack. He did try to go for the Spirit Seer, guys, but he did not kill the Spirit Seer. And that's it. Bottom line, Spirit Seer was able to survive. I did end up using a Fate dice to, have him survive, because the Guardians, remember, by this point, by turn 2, they had generated another Fate dice. I did get something that could help me there. So I was able to save against Ahriman's little psychic stalk or whatever it is. Alright, so what else happens during his turn? Well, he kind of just shifts everything over. The Rhino is kind of shifting its way over here because it wants to kind of try to maybe score an objective later on if it needs to. The Mutilith is still just right here. Again, he can't afford to really move it anywhere because he can't afford to not score on primary. And all of the rest of his army is shifting over here. They want to kill the Wraith Guard so that they can stage up here and assault the Guardians. They can assault, the things over here and just make mincemeat out of them. But the Wraith Guard, they stood strong. I lost 4 of them in that engagement, which was probably pretty lucky, but he did need 6s to wound. I wasn't on an objective, so he wasn't re-rolling his wound rolls or anything like that. And, he wasn't getting the full benefits of his abilities because, again, he has the Flamers, and even though the Flamers auto-hit, they're not getting some of the, different synergies between the stratagems and the Kabbalist, Cabal rituals that you could possibly have. So that was his turn 2. He did also eliminate, by the way, this unit of Swooping Hawks, which I should mention. So after this first unit shot at the Wraith Guard, he wasn't convinced he was going to destroy all the Wraith Guard after that, so he did end up just shooting some stuff at Swooping Hawks, killing them. So he did also kill Swooping Hawks. The Solitaire, of course, died to the Mutilith Vortex Beast. He just got flamered and killed, which was unfortunate, but, I expected that. And that's basically it for his turn. Not a lot happened. He did score an assassinate, obviously, by killing the Solitaire. So, he wasn't doing that bad. He was controlling this primary objective. He's controlling this primary objective. I was controlling this one. I was controlling this one. Game was pretty even at this point, except for secondaries. I was creeping ahead because I had killed, 3 characters so far, and I was about to kill a lot more. So, my turn 3. Basically, this is what happens. The Wraith Guard, again, as I said, they revived the model, so I had 7 of them left. They were able to finish off this unit of, well, basically this unit right here. I chose not to go for Magnus because I didn't feel like 7 Wraith Guard could actually kill him. I felt like I really needed the full unit to be able to waste him right there. So I didn't end up going for him. My units actually... Well, my unit of Wind Riders went over here, so I moved 14 inches up. I was able to draw a bead on one of these Rubric squads, annihilating it. So this unit up here without the character in it died. And then the Wraith Guard were able to finish off this unit, and I positioned them in such a way that they were still kind of behind here. So, they were still kind of safe. If anything wanted to engage them, they would have had to be vulnerable, right? So finished off those 2 Rubric units. This unit back here, I think, ended up reviving one of their models. So they had 6 models total now. And they ended up not being able to really do anything, except I did make a little bit of an error. He actually teleported back here, and he was able to pick up the unit of Swooping Hawks. So the Guardians were up here. The Wraith are up here at this point. He came in, like, right here with 5 models. He's barely able to, like, squeak in there, like, right back here, and he was able to fry these guys. I didn't actually put the X's on them, but just to let you guys know, these Swooping Hawks did die. They were dead. Okay, so that was his like big play, is to kill swooping hawks. I don't think it was really worth it. He knew it wasn't worth it as well by this point in the game. I had killed most of his army. He went through his turn. Magnus was right here. I think he ended up charging the Wraith Guard or something like that, and he did some decent damage. I think he killed like 3 or 4 of them, but didn't kill all of them. And he was sitting like here like a duck afterwards, so I would have had a lot of firepower against him. The Mutalith was right here, the Rhino was right here. And at this point in the game, my opponent decided to call it. Essentially, I had my Wind Riders, I had other units that could deal damage, I had, my Farseers nearby to, create sixes to wound for my D weapons, my Wraithguard weapons. And he basically just said this. He said that he had no tools left to really win. At this point in the game, he had Magnus, who generated 4, and this character who generated 3, and that's it as far as characters. So he had 7 Cabal points to use. He had enough for a single Doombolt, and he just said he didn't have the tools. So that's it. We called it at the end of turn 3, and this is kind of the bittersweet moment in the game because I wanted to see if I could kill Magnus, but my opponent just wasn't feeling it. He said, you basically already won. Let's just call it. It had already been at this point, I think 2+ hours of play. We were joking around a lot and stuff like that and messing around. So we weren't able to fully finish the game, but at this point it was pretty decided anyway. And because of the secondaries that I chose, it was just, there was nothing he could have done to catch up to my point level as far as secondary objectives. With primary, he was doing just fine. And I think, to be honest with you, I think he could have kept up in the primary game because he could have just put this Rhino here. He could have moved the Mutalith over here and kind of forced me, with Temporal Surge, moved it twice, move it over here through this gap here, and forced me to kind of deal with, the Rhino and the Mutalith and Magnus on this objective, but he didn't do that. He chose to charge in and kill Wraithguard. So, that was the end of the game, essentially. So what did I learn from this experience? Well, I learned that if you're able to stop the Thousand Suns player from doing what they want to do and controlling the area of the board that they want to, and are able to make good trades with your units, with units like the Solitaire, with units like Striking Scorpions, which didn't make a good, great trade that time around, but I think they would have made a better trade if I had killed the Rhino instead, and then charged the units that came out of the Rhino as a result. But anyway, that's in hindsight. The Warwalkers being able to destroy the Demon Prince helped a lot because this was his secondary objective, baby. And he said that at the beginning of the game, that he was going to have trouble with secondaries now because this Demon Prince was one of those models that could easily just get anywhere on the board and score on secondary objectives if it wanted to. Like, he told me that basically what his plan was in a lot of games was moving this Demon Prince somewhere 9 inches away, then temporal surging and being able to score on a certain objective was something that he would regularly do. So yeah, that could seem really effective for scoring secondaries. Now, honestly, thinking about this game in hindsight, is this player that I went up against a super competitive, kind of try hard Thousand Suns tournament player, that goes to all these tournaments and wins, No, of course not. But he was a competent player. He knew his army. He knew what to do with his army. It's just, I just didn't give him those options, right? And I think as the Eldar, we can have it both ways. We can have elite units, but we can also trade very well. Whereas Thousand Suns, they need to make sure that each one of their units is destroying multiple enemy units. And if you don't give them that ability, they're not going to be able to effectively deal with you. And this is exactly what happened in this game, right? There were a few points in the game where I got a little lucky, and he just really didn't get the luck that he needed when, he needed sixes to wound. He didn't roll a lot of sixes. He rolled an average number. Like, for example, when I said that this squad shot at the Wraith Guard, he was shooting with 5 flamers. I think he rolled like 16 attacks for him, and to wound, when he rolled his wound dice, he got like 2 wounds. And he rolled like a couple ones, he re-rolled those and didn't get sixes. So it was like he didn't do that much damage with them, right? Whereas normally a unit of flamers like this could go into a unit of, like, let's say, I don't know, what were they called? Deathwing Knights, wound on fives, but because they're on an objective, they're re-rolling their wound rolls. They're getting +1 to wound with Ahriman, I think. And I think that's, now that I think about it, maybe Ahriman wasn't in this unit, but I could have been wrong because he was wounding on sixes with this unit. So maybe Ahriman was part of this unit over here now that I think about it. But anyway, yeah, he had a really hard time essentially killing that. So that's something you can also think about. Yes, Doombolt is very powerful. He could have used Doombolt there, but there was other things that he had to kill, right? And I think killing the Swooping Hawks with a Doombolt might have actually just been better in the long run, because you can kill the whole unit with a Doombolt versus a Wraithguard unit. You're only killing 2 models, and it's not really doing much, right? So I think that was the reasoning behind that. But anyway, again, at this point in the game in round 3, he had lost a significant part of his army. He had lost a lot of characters. He could no longer double Doombolt at this point, and I think that's what really kind of threw him off as far as his damage. So that was the game. And yeah, I learned quite a bit from it, honestly. But am I an expert against Thousand Sons? Probably not still. I probably need, more practice against this type of army, especially if I go second. I think if I went second, it would have been a harder game. And we even talked after the game. He did also believe that if I went second, I would have had a harder time dealing with some of his units. And I do agree with that. I do think I still had the ability to force his units out of cover, make sure, like in this case, for example, he would have had to run these 2 rubrics right out here into the open, and that could have possibly opened up my Wind Riders to kill both of his units. Because Wind Riders, remember, they do so much damage. They actually kill an average of about 10 Rubric Marines on average, without accounting for the Farseer and the Warlock shooting as well. So I think I probably could have killed at least both units, if not most of both units. And then when you consider, maybe even the Solitaire and the Swooping Hawks adding in there, I could have moved these guys up here as well to support. I could have, instead of using the Guardians to kind of go up here, I could have spread them out, been a little bit cheeky with them, and blocked off any kind of mischief from this squad. But anyway, I mean, that's all hindsight. But I think I could have had options still. It just would have been harder, I have to admit. It would have been a little bit more difficult to force my opponent to make the decisions that he made. Alright, so in conclusion, despite the nerfs, which they did get nerfs, and by the way, if I fought the same opponent after the changes, he would have 1 less rubric squad to work with. Thousand Sons are still a tough faction to face if you go in unprepared. If you don't know what they can do, and if you don't play carefully, and if you, go all out for Magnus or something like that, you're probably going to be, surprised in a bad way. So how do you beat them? Well, by playing aggressively, and I say selectively there because you don't want to just throw everything out there. But the units that can trade well in the beginning, Striking Scorpions, Warwalkers, you do want to play those aggressively if you have the choice, if you get first turn. Forcing bad trades, so putting units like Striking Scorpions up there, or, being able to kill an entire unit of rubrics in the character with a Solitaire, and again, you do have to use walls to block line of sight. You can't just throw the Solitaire up there and then expect it to survive Overwatch. It's not going to happen. You need to, basically make sure you're behind walls and stuff like that. That was another thing. He had a really hard time overwatching me because of the terrain layout we were playing on, and just because of the fact that I'm at this point now in Pride Nexus where I'm always trying to deny Overwatch every time I can by moving behind walls, even if it means that I have an extra inch on a charge. I could always use a fate dice, right? I could always use a command point for a command reroll if I need to reroll that charge. So there are options for you. And the Eldar, of course, have that extra command point every turn from the Autarch. And, of course, to, continue with what I was talking about before, protecting your expensive assets is key by keeping them kind of back in the early game. Like if you notice the Wraithguard, the first turn when he had all of his assets up, I didn't just run them forward out into the open. I didn't just throw them on the center objective and say, come and get me. No, I kept them behind that wall until I was able to move behind another piece of, line of sight blocking terrain. And that kind of changed the way my opponent had to deal with that unit. And also, the other thing is, none of his abilities were able to work. So all of his Rubric Marines were not re-rolling all of their wounds, which ended up being huge. I think if he was able to re-roll all his wounds, he would have come in with that deep striking unit and he would have annihilated the Wraith Guard. They would have all been re-rolling wounds, all had, maybe devastating wounds or some crazy thing like that. And it would have been really hard to deal with. And when I say devastating wounds, I just mean the characters in the units, basically, because remember, they're detachment bonus. And if you keep them in reserve as well, like I kept my Wind Riders in reserve, that can be extremely effective against a hyper-elite character-based army. Because essentially your opponent doesn't know where you're coming in from, so they can't protect everywhere, right, at once. And that's really what I think the main weakness of the Thousand Sons is they're not able to effectively screen you out like other armies can. Like if you go up against Guard, for example, Guard are able to screen you out with tons of infantry models. Genestealer Cult, Sisters of Battle, they all have enough models to be able to screen you out effectively. Thousand Sons don't, and especially now, they even don't have it even more because they're even smaller now. They have to either get rid of a character or get rid of another Rubric Marine. And, Thousand Sons, the nerf on them, it does hurt their ability to be able to effectively screen out all of your forces. So, are Thousand Sons this OP, mega, hard faction to face? I think against some players it might seem that way because if a player kind of has the board locked down as far as their skill set, they're very good at, playing competitively. They know all the matchups, they know all the ranges, and, you're going against somebody that regularly wins tournaments and stuff like that. Yeah, the Thousand Sons army that you go up against is going to be really hard to deal with, especially if you go second. I know going second might seem really good for a lot of reasons, but I think if you give Thousand Sons the ability to stage and to kind of maneuver their forces into position without taking any key elements out of it, you might be in for a hard time because they're going to have all their rituals up and stuff like that. If you go first, and if you're using things like Warwalkers and Striking Scorpions, you can actually put a big enough dent in them in the beginning and force them on the back heel to where they're not able to position as effectively. And this is what happened to my opponent. He was taken off guard by that kill against the Demon Prince. Just pure and simple. He was taken off guard. He knew that I had Scout, but he didn't know that I could deal that much damage and that he would fail the average rolls, right? He didn't realize that he was going to fail 2 invul saves out of 2 right off the bat. But that's Warhammer 40k, that sometimes happens. And even if he was able to kind of put his Demon Prince in another position, there would have been something else that I would have killed. I would have killed the Rhino, for example. And I actually think, in hindsight, like I said, I think the Demon Prince was probably something I shouldn't have risked in the beginning, but it is what it is. So anyway, I hope this video was helpful for you guys in learning how to maybe deal with the Thousand Sons. I know that some of the diagrams might have been a little bit confusing, but I hope me explaining through it kind of made sense. I don't know if you guys know this, but Adobe is essentially getting rid of 3D Paint from their software, or not Adobe, I think it's like Microsoft or something. They're getting rid of 3D Paint, essentially, and that's the program I use. So it's been having some weird issues lately, and I think it's because it's not being supported anymore as of November. So I'll have to use another thing to kind of, show you guys how the units are moving around and stuff like that. But anyway, thanks for watching. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I know this, again, this is not a tournament game. I'm not claiming that this is going to be, your go-to strategy. It's going to win you every game against Thousand Sons. But it's definitely an effective strategy if you don't know how to deal with Thousand Sons effectively. It's something that you can definitely try out and have some success with because, going against another competent player, I was able to have a great amount of success with it. So let me know what you guys think again in the comments section. And if you want to support the channel and join the channel's Patreon, I will leave that in the description below. That will give you permanent access to our Discord community for free because of the free trials that Patreon gives out. And of course, our Discord community is one of the best in the Warhammer 40k community. We have some great players there who love talking about strategy, tactics, and of course, hobbying. I'm also an Amazon affiliate and have a channel store page as well. So if you want to grab some discounted Eldar minis on Amazon, I would grab them now, by the way, while you can, before GW takes off the combat patrol and, kind of gets rid of some of those great value sets that they have on their website, because then third-party sellers are going to, mark up the prices insanely, and you're not going to be able to get the same deals as now. So definitely, if you need some Wind Riders, you need some Guardians, you need a Wraith Lord to just be cool, definitely purchase one of those. You can do that for cheaper on Amazon, and, you can help the channel out a little bit as well by using the affiliate link. Also, if you want to grab some Eldar inspired apparel, some shirts, some sweaters, some cups, stickers, whatever for your, Eldar loving needs, then I have that on the channel store page, and you can check that out in the link below as well. I have a ton of stuff, from Eldar symbols to little jokes about the Eldar and stuff like that. So definitely check that out. And, even if it's for a quick laugh. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching and have a great one. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.